Hey everybody, welcome to Houdini Hangout. It is the 5th of April, I guess. Here we are in a new month. Took a couple weeks off for GDC. So we're here with kind of a little bit of a different setup than we have previously. I had Michael Goldfarb on at the beginning of the year, if you remember. Or a little bit later in last year. And he was really cool to kind of walk through a lot of KineFX stuff. That's certainly not my wheelhouse in Houdini. So for me, that was really helpful to just kind of have someone else that's way more experienced with it and has some great skills in that regard, be able to kind of walk through how to use KineFX and things like that, and talk to some areas of Houdini that I don't have a lot of visibility into, that I just haven't really touched that much. So tonight, I have the pleasure of welcoming Chris Rutledge. He is Tokyo Megaplex on on Twitter and all the other socials and things like that. But he is here to kind of talk about some of the stuff that he's been doing recently. You may have seen he just dropped a pretty cool spot. What was that? Just yesterday, Chris?
Yeah, I think it was Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
My studio, Grid Machine, who I've been doing almost all of my commercial work with for the past year, since I sort of joined them officially. And then we were working together for a year before that, before I was a part of that team. That just dropped, and we can definitely talk about it. It got some nice feedback online, which I was super happy about. And it was the first project where we used Karma XPU, or Karma in any form, as opposed to Redshift or whatever, for the rendering for everything. And it was really, really nice to use for that. So I'm definitely a big Karma head these days, and I'm excited to talk about that among other things.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I think you and I actually kind of got hooked up because we were talking a little bit about some Karma USD type stuff, shaders and things like that. I'm sure you'll probably maybe touch on some of that trickiness that you ran into and some of the things there. But I know that I've known you as far as creatively for kind of these more not abstract, but different kind of characters and things like that. That
stylized character stuff, I would say, that I'm trying to. I don't know. I feel like for a long time, I mean, I've always been interested in character stuff more than anything else, but I kind of Houdini piqued my curiosity, and it wasn't really evident how I would use it for character stuff when I first got into it.
Right.
I kind of, as I learned more about it, I learned that character effects is a sort of department in a lot of these studios. And a lot of people I had a teacher who was my one of my animation professors in college, who was a character effects artist at Blue Sky at the time. And I went to school in New York, and it's kind of close to where Blue Sky used to be, rest in peace. So there were some teachers that would come down from there, and I got to learn a little bit about that. And he told me about Marvelous Designer and stuff. And, anyway, I got into the Houdini stuff, and I feel for me, I've also been always interested in using weirder or less commonly used tools for things, just because I feel every time someone does that, it ends up, I don't know if it's directly a result of doing that, but it feels like it does kind of help them create something that feels a little bit different, because our tools influence our work. It's sort of unavoidable. So I love how, getting into more character stuff in Houdini, it's really influenced my work and made it so that I can really easily turn a character into a flip simulation or do some really crazy stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think I was actually having a conversation today with some instructors and things like that, teachers. And I know that you have an interest in teaching and things like that. And some professors and things like that, where we were having a little chat about, your tools and kind of the fundamentals behind them, you know, whether it's art fundamentals, animation fundamentals, even technical fundamentals of what is programming, what are these different, you know, things that we're trying to do in a program like Houdini. And like, it's interesting how sometimes we get so focused on what the tooling is and sometimes let that drive how our creativity is. And I think there's some cool
Totally.
examples that you've done recently of like, hey, let's kind of break out of that a little bit and kind of mess with that and kind of flip some of those ideas on their head, which is really interesting to see.
Totally. Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Like, I mean, people, it's kind of a funny like trope at this point, people talking about like, you know, oh, this software is better than that software, or like, you know, this render engine looks better than that render engine. Like Octane looks so much better than Redshift or whatever. And I think what's funny is that, you know, at the end of the day, especially these days, like they're all just so similar and they all really do the same stuff. And I feel like, you know, when I'm talking about like the tools influencing your work, it's stuff like how like even really small things like just like the default settings for like a material. Like I remember
Yep.
in Redshift for a while, the default settings for like the roughness on a material was like set to 0. And then the default settings in Arnold was set to like zero point 0.2 or something. And like,
Yeah, same too.
and people would always say like, oh, Redshift just looks so plasticky. And I feel like that has to do with the fact that like some of the materials people were creating, they just weren't playing with the sliders on them. Like they were just leaving it their default because they were like, yeah, this works for now. And they move on to the next thing. And it's like just the smallest little decisions like that in a software can end up like having these weird ripple effects that like affect, you know, the work later on. And I definitely don't think you should let, you know, the tool that you're using like dictate like what kind of work you're going to do. And that's also why I personally love using Houdini, not just for sort of like the stuff that you expect to use it for, like, you know, explosions or things like that. Like, obviously it's amazing for that stuff. And if you want to do that stuff, it's like the best tool you could possibly use. Um, it's, I don't know, it's a lot of fun to figure out like, you know, how to take those tools, not even designed for the things you're trying to do necessarily, and figure out how to like integrate it into those workflows and stuff.
Right. Yeah, cool. I mean, I love that. And I think hopefully that's a pretty good segue into you kind of walking through some of these things. Let me just say this too real quick before we get in. You know, if you have any comments or questions in the chat, feel free to drop those in there. I'll be kind of keeping a little bit of a closer eye on this, the chat today than I maybe do most of the time, just because I'm trying to do 20 things normally. So yeah, as always, you know, please feel free to drop comments, questions. You know, if anybody's heckling from the back, that's great too. We can live with that. But I think why don't I turn it over to you and you can kind of walk us through some of these different things that you've got in your network here. So why don't you go ahead and kind of talk through some
Nice.
of these things?
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm right here with my little bulby character that I made for the Mardini Day 20. Yeah, Day 20 bulb. Um, and this is Solaris, where, you know, I'm just sort of setting up the lighting and stuff and doing all this fun stuff with Karma. And I think I can turn on a little render view here so we can see sort of like what this final guy ends up looking kind of like. Yeah, and it's super nice and quick, and um, he looks great. But yeah, so this is Bulby. He was this little light bulb character that I sculpted just based on that prompt for in a Adobe Medium, which is usually what I use to do VR sculpting these days, which is usually also what I end up using for like sculpting most of my characters these days. You know, sometimes I used to do more like box modeling and back in like the Maya days and stuff. And, you know, then I got into like ZBrush and was sculpting most of my characters in there. But once I found out about um, VR sculpting, I just became obsessed with that. And I just found it so much faster for like creating that sort of base character. Um, yeah, let me go back up to the top of my network where I have basically just this FBX that I'm bringing in of the character. I think if I turn on wireframe mode, you can kind of see inside the bulb. This is sort of one of the things that made it a little bit tricky is like, the outside of the bulb, this is like a refractive material, and then you have like, the eyes and sort of like the spark mouth thing inside. But when I sculpt the character in Medium, I can just bring it in using the FBX character import, which is, part of the KineFX tool set. And I bring that in, and it comes in basically as a bunch of different like packed geometries. So each different layer that I have in Adobe Medium is coming in as its own packed geometry. So what I've ended up doing is I'll basically split them out, and I'll just make a split that's splitting out primitive 0. And then I'll just copy it a bunch of times until I split out all of them. So like now, because I've removed primitive 0, there's a new primitive 0. And that's like this next piece of pack geo, which is like the kind of diaper looking part of the bulb. And then the eyeballs, and then the pupils that were on their own layer. So every layer that I have in Medium ends up getting split out into its own little different pack geo. And so then what I'm doing basically is pretty simply just like converting them to polygons. But when I do that, the topology is usually pretty nasty, like tries and stuff. So I then will use exoside quad remesher, which is like a total game changer that just very quickly remeshes, almost anything you throw at it into sort of a much nicer deformable topology, which is ideal for characters. And, for me, my whole thing is I'm always trying to make, entire short films and, projects from scratch. I don't want to mess around with like manually retopologizing my character or manually laying out UVs or doing any of that really meticulous, like manual weight painting work or whatever, if I don't have to. So when I have shortcuts like these, I'll tend to try to use them because, it's either like I could make one really, really nice character that I spend a ton of time retopologizing and can deform properly. And then, I'll throw away and make a new one for the next project. Or I can, make like 10 times as many characters by just taking those little shortcuts and stuff. So anyway,
just real quick, is that that Exoside is through Labs, right? That's like a Labs integration. You pay for
it's a
Exoside,
lab,
but
yeah, exactly. So my understanding is I think it's a Labs tool that Side Effects Labs maintains, the like Houdini integration for it. And it basically just, I think it just looks at the Exoside like, C++, I'm assuming, like exe or whatever. And then, runs that stuff over it with like Python, and then it outputs it as an FBX and then brings it back in over here. But yeah, it's part of Labs, and, you just have to go to this Exoside site and license it. And I think it's like $50 for like a non-commercial version and like $80 for the full version, something like that. But it's so worth getting. Like I really can't recommend that enough. Anyway, so I'll do that. When I have colors from the vertices that I want to bring in, like as you can see up here, this isn't the best example character wise, but like I'll have vertex colors and like, this thing is yellow over here and all that. So in the interest of wanting those to transfer back over, like when Exoside quad remesher does the remesh, it doesn't transfer those colors over. So I'll usually do like a attribute transfer, which I'm trying to find an example of me doing it here. And I actually don't think I maybe did it in this project at all. But anyway, I'll like stash it, save it to a file, and then that way it's not going to recook the quad remesher. And then I'll do an attribute transfer of the color from the non-quad remesh version. And I'll do that for each separate like piece. And then the other prep stuff that I'm doing is like, well, on the bulb, I'm setting the alpha attribute so I can like see through the bulb and stuff into the eyes and everything. I'm just doing some quick, crappy UVs. I'm setting a name attribute, which is super, super handy in general, but especially so for when you're rendering in Solaris, because then you can use that to sort of differentiate different pieces of a geometry and assign different materials to different parts or whatever. And And then I made this group for some reason. Also, I'm not sure why exactly, but
You can never
because
have
the
too many
name can kind of,
groups.
you can never have too many groups, and the name kind of does the same thing though. But yeah, anyway, then I get this, cute little bulby guy. This is sort of where I end up. I did just some like resampling and noise and polywiring to make that zap, which if I had could have spent more time on like one aspect of this, I probably would have like refined this zap a little bit more because it's kind of blocky and polygonal and stuff, and I could have made it, I don't know, feel a little bit more organic maybe, but uh whatever. So yeah, let's move on then from there. That's just the whole sort of like, you know, asset prep stuff before I get into rigging. And it's honestly like pretty simple. I know it looks maybe kind of complicated here. There's like some weird stuff I decided to do. Like, I wanted to UV each of these separately in like a for each loop, just because, that would give them each individual like better UVs or whatever. But yeah, overall, it's basically just like taking my thing, remeshing it, making sure the colors on it, making sure it has names and UVs and all that. And that's really it. And then, so I can do that pretty quickly. I would say, you know, this probably took me like, maybe like 30 minutes to an hour to like model it in VR. And then like maybe another 15 to 30 minutes to like do all this prep stuff. And then I got to get into like sort of the rigging stuff.
What's the
One other thing,
transition from VR to here like? Like, do you save it just as an FBX from like what
I
kind of
just save
VR
it
are
as
you
a
using?
yeah. I just save it as an FBX straight from Adobe Medium,
Okay,
and it just comes in exactly like this. Like
sure.
there's no step in between this and Medium. This is like directly from Medium, and I sculpted this little plug thingy just for fun because I thought maybe it would be cool to use in the environment, but ended up not using it.
Right.
The one other
Cool.
thing that I'll throw out there that I do that's kind of like a random little thing is like I'm kind of constantly for these characters like having to set up like an eye. So I have this proper eye geo HDA that I made that I really need to like do more work on. But simply, it's just basically two spheres. One is named pupil, one is named like eye. Um, and then they have groups, they have the name attributes, and then they have the colors, and that's it. And then I wanted to kind of customize this eye a little bit. So I did that inside of this HDA by just like breaking it open and messing with it. And like, so this is kind of a weird like HDA that I made for myself that I don't usually just use as the HDA. I usually use it so I can have it like pre-set up and then I can break it open and like, tweak it to however I want or like, but I should probably go and add controls like, scale up the pupil or, move the eye or like change eye shape or something like that. I just, haven't spent the time on that yet, but it's, super worthwhile. And even just doing this little thing has saved me so much time of having to reset just this part up like for so many characters. And then over here, I'm just like creating two of them and transforming them. But what's nice is that with these transform sops, I have kind of like a nice way of being able to like control and rotate them and animate them and stuff, which I am actually doing uh, over here. I have the exact same thing basically copied. And this is sort of where the animated version of this is happening. Um, so if I play through this, you'll see I have this weird little eye animation happening. And what I end up doing later is, well, I also, so I animated them kind of like with some noise, like I think just using up here, I used chops, just the most basic chops you could possibly use.
Yeah, that's what I thought
Hopefully
it was probably.
everybody knows, hopefully at this point, and if you don't, don't be ashamed. But uh, if you right click on any channel, you can go to motion effects and then say, noise, and then you can create sort of like a procedural noise animation on those channels, and that can drive any kind of channel, including translation and rotation, which is handy for doing this like kind of eye stuff. Or it's also handy for like adding like noise to the camera, which I did in this scene also for the final version, where I wanted to have some camera shake and stuff. Yeah, so over here, this is animating, and this is just like some basic like keyframing on top of the noise, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And that keyframing that's happening here doesn't really make sense until you look at what I did down here, where I added like this rotation. And I keyframed this while I was like, looking at it through this one over here. But I just wanted to create kind of a cool, like, I don't know, cartoony, like eyeball switching kind of effect. I would say I definitely got like inspiration from this for like this dude Olav Berman, who's like one of my favorite CG artists, and he does like some of the most insane animation with the craziest rigs I've ever seen. And you can see like the eyes are like switching here and stuff, just like super cartoony and like really stylized, but like really beautiful, like kind of sort of still like photorealistic rendering and stuff. Another good example is like this food thief thing that some people might have seen before. He has directed and done a lot of work with the studio Mindbender, which is like also one of my favorite studios. But if you play through this, you'll see like how just like dynamic this rig is, and how it can kind of like change like the number of limbs that it has. Like it has like only like 3 limbs here, it seems like.
Right.
Like they just don't even have a back limb. And then I think it'll get more in a second. Oh yeah, now he's got all the limbs, but he's like kind of a different shaped like cat now, where he's like more like, I don't know, like biped cartoon character. And then what's great here is if you watch closely, you'll see like the eyes kind of switch, I think. Yeah, you'll see they flip around, and then like the left eye becomes the right eye. Anyway, so this was like a very, very cheap kind of like imitation of like Olav Berman in a way. And, I want to give him credit for being just like a big inspiration in general for cool character stuff. But yeah, I love his work, and I don't know, that's a little bit of where like that idea came from. But yeah, definitely love like anytime people are kind of pushing 3D character stuff to like do stuff that is not so immediately obvious or easy to do with 3D characters. And what I end up doing, well, anyway, I'll come back to this in a second, because I'll show how I integrate this back into the setup. But if I go back up here to the rig prep, I just do like a time shift here just to make sure that, we're not recalculating any of this stuff like every single frame, which we would be because of this like zappy bit over here. And for anyone who doesn't know, there's a little green clock icon next to a node if it's being recalculated every single frame, meaning that there's like animated data on it. And so if you time shift something, that will like to a single frame, that will like get rid of that clock. So over here we have the clock, over here we don't. It's not being calculated every frame, and it'll like play back a lot faster now.
Yeah, many times when you're working on something and it's like your playback speed is terrible or your viewport is acting crazy or something, a lot of times it can be just as simple as, oh, I've got some animated property in there or something that you just need to throw a time shift in.
Yeah, it's so great for being able to diagnose like, why is my setup slow? And you like look at it and like you see like, wait a minute, there's a clock here, but it's not moving. Why is that? And then you can go back up and find out why, or you can just like add a time shift in and fix that, and it'll improve your your speeds. But yeah, Houdini is the best software ever for being able to just like troubleshoot problems like that and walk through and find stuff. And the time shift, I mean, the clock icon is a handy little extra, kind of trick there that they've added in that isn't even necessary, but it's nice to have. So yeah, and then here's my weird rigging setup that I have talked about a couple times before, but I'm always kind of messing with it and improving upon it. It's my very quick sort of way of like semi-procedurally rigging a character. But I basically will VDB from polygons the character, and then I will do this straight skeleton 3D, which is a labs tool on it, which will then kind of create like a sort of crappy like polyline skeleton for whatever you feed it. And you can resample that so it's a little bit more neat. And I have a fuse in here also. I tweaked this like one point with a transform, and then I deleted the stuff on the left because I'm going to mirror that back after once I set up the rest of the rig properly. And then I have this Rigify HDA that I've made, where I basically just select what joint I want to be the root. And in this instance, the one that I want to be the root is already the root. So it wasn't that necessary, but it like will basically like go and use an edge transport to measure like a distance attribute from a point, and then it will take that distance attribute and promote it to prim, and then it will like sort the points and the prims by that distance attribute. And then it does a polypath. I don't totally understand what the point of this is, to be honest. I figured this out by following Matt Estella's like CG Wiki KineFX page. And then I delete the attributes that I don't need. The distance attribute and the position are the only ones that I want to keep. And then I use a rig doctor to just like initialize transforms and names and stuff. And I promote the name prefix thing up here so that I can have it, say whatever name that I want. So if I use a rig pose now on it, I have like a functional rig, because with KineFX, when you think about like what it is different from just like points and lines, I mean, it's basically just points and lines, except if we middle click on here, you'll see we have the name attribute, and we have the transform attribute, and we have this local transform attribute also. And transformation matrices are like a whole complex topic, but the idea of it is like you can think of like a transformation matrix for anyone who isn't familiar already as like a way that you're transforming something like you would with a transform SOP. Now imagine like all of that data, not just the position, but like the way that it's rotated and the way that it's scaled and the position as well. That's all able to be stored in a transformation matrix. And each of the points on the skeleton has its own transformation matrix, and it all has its like world space transform, which is the transform up here. And it all has its local transform, which is basically its transform like relative to its parent, which is what enables it so that like, when you rotate it, like I'm changing this rotation matrix, and that's affecting like the transforms of all the children matrices, and you can rig characters really nicely that way. Hopefully that made some sense. I feel like that was either like too basic for people who understand transformation matrices already, or it was like too confusing for people who didn't. So I don't know if that actually helped anybody, but it's fine.
No, I think that's good. Yeah, because I mean, really, that's the distinction that I've always been taught about, KineFX, is that you need these attributes on there for it to be able to kind of be past kind of the concept of just points and lines. But at its core, It is points and lines. So it's like it's a little bit just you need a couple extra things in order to make it see it as a rig, basically.
Yeah, yeah. It's just especially for characters, like the rotations are so important. Like because what we're mostly doing, especially in a FK rig, is we're rotating bones. You know, people don't often scale bones, but you can do that too. Or you can translate them, but people don't usually do that either with an FK rig. Um, and so the rotations are really important. And you know, with just the P attribute, just the XYZ in space, you don't have any rotation information from that. You know, and the matrix is sort of like the thing that gives you that. And it's also interesting if you look at the local transform, it's a 16 float matrix, versus the regular transform is like a 9 float matrix.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that the regular transform doesn't have the data for the position because it doesn't need to, because the world position stuff is already stored on P,
Yep.
right? So that's
Yep.
why there's like a less data in the transform here than there is in the local transform, where it does need to have that extra position data stored for each local transform. So yeah, but that's, you know, kind of the core idea of like the rigging stuff is it's all matrices and local versus world space, and you can
Matrices
do a
aren't
lot of
scary
fun
ever,
stuff.
right?
I mean, they're a little bit scary, but I've been able to wrap my head around them a lot better recently.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I don't want to go into too deep of a dive with it,
No.
but like once I realized like, oh, it's just like sort of a grid of numbers, and like one of them is like a vector pointing up, one of them is a vector, you know, pointing down like the x-axis, and one of them is a vector pointing down the z-axis. You then realize like how you could make your own custom transform matrix with just the numbers by like, you know, changing the directions that they're pointing in. And you know, you also then start to understand why like you can have not only just scale and translation and uh, rotation, but you can also have shear, because like you could, you know, make it so that that transform matrix, for example, like if you just change this vector to like move, like, you know, point in this direction, then you're shearing your whole object.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I think this is, yeah, crazier than we want to
Good.
get for this stream. But
You also got a little what's up from Clyde here in the chat. So I don't know. I don't know if
oh
Clyde's.
snap, oh
Clyde.
shit, yeah, it's Clyde from he's my my classmate back at back in college. What's up, Clyde? I haven't been looking at the chat.
Oh no, it's okay.
Um,
I have been.
nice,
You're good. Yeah.
amazing.
So what's up, Clyde?
Uh,
How's it going?
Sweet, yeah. Good to see you,
Yeah.
man. Thanks for hopping in.
Keep on trucking. Yeah. And sorry, I kind of derailed you a little there, but
No, yeah, we're good. Yeah, no, thanks for letting me know. But yeah, anyway, so that's kind of the creation of like the whole skeleton here for this guy, and it's cool because, well, actually, the last part is I like name these joints to be the left side, and then I change the name so that they all have this like left prefix, just with like a point wrangle. And then I'm mirroring that whole left side over here, and it's creating a nice like mirrored skeleton that works nicely because my character is symmetrical. And then I stash it just for good measure, just because like since this is being created procedurally, like if something weird changed up there, like it could screw up my whole setup and change the point numbers and stuff and break things. But yeah, basically, like once I have this kind of skeleton with all those attributes that I need and stuff, then I can just take the character's mesh, and then I can do the joint capture by harmonic, and that will basically do my like skinning, you would call it in Maya, or capturing is what they call it in Houdini. And now I have like a functional rig technically. Like if I do a bone deform over here, and I make a rig pose, and I display flag this guy, I can see my joints over here. I can select a bunch of them, and I can just start like kind of tweaking stuff and like, you know, pose my character in a funny way. And I think it's pretty uncommon and weird, or maybe it's not that uncommon, but it's a little bit strange to like not just have my characters arm be like shoulder, elbow, like wrist. But I really like, especially for doing these stylized cartoony characters, like having all these extra bones that I can like just grab a bunch of and like kind of rotate them all together or whatever, and like make these really weird kind of cartoony poses, like as if they have like 50 elbows or whatever. Um, and so, I could delete a bunch of these joints if I didn't want that. But for my kind of characters, this works pretty well anyway, and I don't mind it. So yeah, that is the sort of like skinning and skeleton creation part of the process. And the next thing to get into is sort of the animation part. And the first thing that I'll show for that real quick is if you go down here, I have this like update anim attribute copy. Attribute copies are super, super handy for me, especially for like doing like deformations, like pre bone deform. And with a lot of rigs, like especially character rigs, they'll mostly be made up of the bone deform kind of setup and stuff, and all the different ways that you're like animating the bones and stuff, and then like blend shapes usually. Like for my characters, when I have like a character with a mouth doing lip sync, what I'll usually do is like I'll have like some bones in the face, but usually just like bones to either control the eyes and or the jaw, and like opening and closing the jaw with rotations, and the rest of the mouth shapes I have with blend shapes. And I kind of like mix the two up together. But when you think about that, like you kind of realize that there's like an order of operations that has to happen, because if you blend shape the mouths on the character after you deform it with the bones and stuff, it's going to screw things up, because it's just going to blend shape back into that original shape. So being able to like split out different parts of my character and like the eyes, I do up here, and like deform them on their own, before the whole bone deform stuff. I can then use like the attribute copy to like copy that animation back onto here. And it'll play back like super fast. And then same with over here, I'm animating like the flickering of the electricity, which is also grabbing the position attribute from up here, where I have like that flicker animation happening, where I set up, the whole flicker, but before I like time shifted it to be static. So yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so what you're doing is you're basically taking these other two animations that you've kind of already done previously, and then copying that P attribute back on there, and that's allowing that animation to kind of skip past your where you're doing your bone setups and all those kind of things, basically, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a really cheap way to just update like one part of my rig, right? And you can see like the eyes are like being tweaked here, but like when I do the bone deform, if I do it after this eye stuff, then like it's like that's like the correct order of operations, right? However,
Mm-hmm.
if I were to like do this over here, where I'm bone deforming it first, and then I like do this over here, it's just going to snap the character back. Or if I do it like this is updating the whole character with the mouth flicker thing, but if I were to do it like over here, like now the eyes are like stuck back in their original like sort of like resting world space thing. So like this is the wrong order of operations. So you can do any kind of bone deform stuff that you want, or not bone deform, sorry. You can do any kind of like tweaking to your character's like mesh that you want, like, and like, animate like, even like soft transform things, or just like blend shapes or whatever, but just have that happen before the bone deform, and it gives you like a ton of control. Um, So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes
Uh,
sense.
um, and then another thing I'll throw out up here is this trick from Oliver Hotz that I think won't be necessary for too much longer, hopefully, if side effects does something about it, which I believe they're like aware of this. But if you add this like tangent U attribute with the polyframe with these settings, it will like end up speeding up the bone deform performance a lot for certain rigs. I've seen it take some rigs from like 20 FPS playback to like 120 or more. So it can make a huge difference.
Yes, they
Um,
are aware of that. I know that for a fact. Yes.
yeah. And then the only other thing I guess worth pointing out over here um, is that this flickering thing that I'm doing. This is just like some custom Vex code, but it's pretty simple. Basically, I have this on and off sliders that I've made. Um, and I am basically saying set the alpha to be minimum, um, or sorry, basically take a random seed for each frame, um, and then uh, take the maximum value between that and the on slider. Um, so it's going to be one if the on slider is set to one, and it's going to be whatever the random value is if it's set to zero. Um, and then I'm saying take the minimum value of that whole function, um, and the off slider, so that way it's going to be completely on for now, and then when I turn the on slider off but leave the off one on, it'll kind of flicker like this. You can kind of see, let me turn off the wire shading, but you can kind of see that electricity is kind of flickering on and off with the alpha. um, and then when they're both off, it'll just stay off, and then when I turn it back on, like that, it'll flicker again, and then it will be good. Um, and then the only other thing is I have this emit attribute that I'm creating, and I'm saying if on is less than 5.5 and off is greater than 0.5, um, i.e., like it's like this where on is set to off and off is set to on. Um, this is a little bit of a brain teaser, but like ultimately it's like pretty simple compared to the matrix stuff, at least. And then I can basically from that create this emit attribute, which is going to be used later on when we make our whole like sparks setup, where it's like emitting sparks only where the light is flickering, if that makes sense. um,
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
and so yeah, so that's pretty much what's going on there. And then over here on the skeleton anim stuff, I can get into kind of all the fun things happening here. Um, so if I go back to frame one, you can see he's kind of posed just standing like this, and he's kind of chilling and puts his hand on his chin, and then he kind of starts zapping and buzzing and freaking out a little bit, and then he goes back to normal, um, and it loops. And over here, there's a couple weird things that I'm doing. Like one thing is that I'm like adding this. You'll see like when I play this back, the bulb kind of like grows as he's like got more electricity in him, and it kind of shrinks when he has less. Um, And I'm just doing that over here with like a lattice that I'm just like animating with a blend shape. And I was just kind of playing with this like slider basically, like while playing this animation to see like what kind of felt right, and added like a nice extra secondary bounce. Nothing crazy, just like a little bit of extra stuff. I remember like a long time ago, I made this short for uh, Adult Swim, called Sensitive Hearing. Um, and uh, I did some of these same kind of tricks where like I animated the whole character basically, um, but then for extra squash and stretch, I would like do like a lattice on the face, and I would kind of like sort of like just animate that lattice as like an extra layer of like giving it a little bit more life and stuff, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah,
Um, so
I
it's
think it's certainly an interesting idea. I think that a lot of people wouldn't maybe do a lot of times in a rig, you know, in just a standard kind of, you know, rigging world or whatever. You wouldn't think, "Oh, I'm going to deform my character and squish it around or whatever." But when you're getting into these characters like this that are animated and are, you know, maybe non-photorealistic or whatever, or even could be photorealistic but are kind of breaking reality in a little bit sense, I think you can do some of these things that I think, to kind of speak to what we were talking about earlier, might not be the default kind of thought process of the tooling. And so you kind of have to break out of that a little bit. So it's neat to see some of these ideas of tweaking with warps and different, you know, changing the geometry kind of, you know, before you're
yeah,
deforming from your bones.
yeah, totally. And it's also like a thing where I think Houdini is especially good for this type of thing because what I really am doing is I'm stacking on all these different sort of layers of things. Like, I don't know, another cool example of this is I saw a Houdini talk a while ago from someone at Man vs. Machine where they were like, yeah, we did this whole crazy simulation of cloth swirling around and forming into this shape. Um, and then we just added like a twist deformer afterwards just to make it extra crazy. And it's like, that's so cool that you can just like do this whole crazy animation or do this whole crazy sim and stuff, and then just stack on these little extra flourishes that are like so easy to add, you know? And the like procedural nature of Houdini, I think really makes that stuff great. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
but
there's a question. It says, I wonder if guys use the lattice trick to correct for random animation problems, like maybe from, you know, from like an animation in a pipeline or something like that when you've got stuff coming
yeah,
to you.
that's a good question. I think more frequently people probably, rather than lattices, I'm sure people will do that with lattices sometimes, but I think more frequently people will do corrective blend shapes is kind of like a common thing in the industry where like if, and I've actually almost never used them, so I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is basically like if you know, have your character animating into a specific pose and like that pose is kind of making like part of the rig look weird or break or something, or like, you know, like you want like your character's arm like bending back like this to like kind of flex a muscle on it or something like that, you would create like a corrective blend shape where like that blend shape animates when you pose the bones like that or something. um and so yeah, people definitely do all kinds of like corrective stuff like that. I think also like another thing that this kind of workflow illustrates and highlights is like kind of the stuff that you can do if you are both the rigger and the animator. And you kind of need to be both right now with Houdini. Like Houdini's not really designed in a way where like a lot of people are making rigs that a lot of animators are picking up and handing off. You know, maybe that will change at some point in the future, but it has made the life of someone like me, who again I'm trying to do almost everything, um, and I love doing the rig and the animation, and being able to do them together gives me kind of, I feel like, some like sort of superpowers in certain ways. It's it's like a perfect tool for me. So
That's
yeah.
awesome. Cool.
Um, but anyway, let's get into the animation stuff up here. So I can walk through real quick my basic setup here. It's not too complex. This is a pretty standard kind of setup for the kind of way that I would go about animating a character these days. Um, but basically, I'll turn off a bunch of this stuff. I'll turn off this loop thingy, and I'll turn off these noises. Um, and basically, what I have here is this is the animation, just like completely raw, like basically like the keyframe animation that I have. And it looks terrible. It looks so boring. Like I'll play it back over here, and you can see, yeah, he like actually let me tweak it so it plays back real time, and like we'll skip a couple frames. Um, so like this is what he looks like without me doing any kind of like procedural tweaking to the animation. So it's really, really simple. And like, it's even kind of simpler than what you're seeing here because like, you know, sure, there's like some in-betweens and things like that. But like, for the most part, like I'm just kind of hitting a couple of specific frames. Like or poses. So it's like pose 1, pose 2, and then here's like a little anticipation pose into this pose 3, or pose 4, you could say, if you count the anticipation. And then here's like a sort of 5th pose, then a 6th pose where the arms are kind of bouncing back, and then like a 7th pose here, and then it goes back to the first pose. So it's like 7 poses that I've gone and like set up in here. And the way that this is set up also, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm like translating the character up and like moving it where I want in world space. I usually just use a transform SOP for that. And then I have this delete joints over here where I kind of have my IK set up, which I use mainly for the legs in most cases. And I could do a whole rant about IK versus FK and why you want to use IK for the legs and stuff. But I mean, the core of it is like, if, we didn't do that, you'd see like there's all this annoying, the legs are not sticking on the ground, and there would be a lot of annoying compensation we'd have to do with each pose to like rotate the legs the way that they need to be rotated to touch the ground properly. So this whole idea behind IK is it's basically like, let's inversely solve the way that the rotations need to be set up for you to get the foot in this position in world space that you want. And so that's super easy to set up in Houdini. I delete everything but like the joints that I want to use for my sort of IK chain. And then I can animate them over here. And this, I kind of screwed this up. That should probably be more like that. But like there's basically in an IK chain, there's the root, there's the mid, and there's the tip. The tip being like the foot, the mid being like the knee, and the root being like, the hip. And what it is doing is doing that kind of like inverse solve on this skeleton to get it to sort of line up to where it needs to be, where now, the feet will stay in the right place. And this mid bone will act as a PVC or a pole vector constraint. And that's basically telling like the knee, like what direction it wants to point in, if that makes sense. And on this rig pose also, I'll point out that, you'll see the child bone of this isn't moving around as I move it. That's because I have it set to work in world space, but I could turn it on and you could see that then, that will no longer be world space based, and it will use the local space, and it will affect like the children again. So yeah, but then over here, yeah, that's basically, I don't know, the main kind of setup in terms of the outline of the character animation there. And what I can do is show you also, I have this fun jiggler that I've made. This like it's basically literally just like a chop net wrapped up in like a SOP HDA. And if I dive in, you'll see it's just basically grabbing the data that it's processing in this chop net, and that has this jiggle chop. So I didn't really even make almost anything here. I just made like a wrapper, you could say, for chops. But yeah, I can play with this, and if I hit play on here now, you'll see this will add some nice secondary action to the animation. Like you'll see like you get this little bounce here, right? As an example. Or if I go up here, you'll see there's a little bit of extra nice juicy bounce when he puts his like hand on his chin. Yeah, the jiggler is like a really awesome way to just like procedurally get some of that secondary action, follow through like animation principle stuff in there without having to really go in and keyframe it yourself like I used to when I was, animating in Maya or whatever. So that is a super sweet thing. You can set this up yourself, but I also have it as an HDA available like on my Patreon and Gumroad and stuff if people want to grab it. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I
it's
think
super
actually
handy.
somebody Polygon Sandwich shared that
Oh,
your
sweet.
Gumroad on there. Um, so yeah,
Nice.
that's
Thank you, Patrick. I think that's Patrick. Is Polygon Sandwich. I'm 99% sure.
but yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think it's a cool idea to say like that if people are doing things over and over again, right? Like the idea of making an HDA out of something that you do all the time is such a unique thing that Houdini can do for you, and
totally.
can save like even just that. I mean, that jiggler, like all it is some chops and some jiggle stuff in there, and it's basically just processing that geometry through chops. But it would take you 5-10 minutes to set that up, or if you don't use chops that often, it might take you longer to go back and figure out how do I do that, how do I bring it into chops, and to have a node that allows you to do that once and not have to get back in there every single time is a huge time saver.
Totally. Yeah. No, highly recommend getting in the habit of making HDAs because it will, in the long term, really save you a lot of time. Including with this next one that I'll show real quick, which is my rig noise HDA. So, like this animation is already kind of interesting as is with the jiggle. Now it's like kind of made it, I think, I don't know, like workable kind of. It's not like totally boring. Um, and I could play with the settings and like tweak it a lot. I could like, add a bunch of damping on there, or I could I don't know, tweak like the multiplier on it and make it like jiggle like 10 times more, and then it's going to be totally crazy. This is obviously not practical in most cases, but if you want to do a really weird, insanely over the top, like abstract cartoony thing, it could be kind of cool. Um,
Oh, Chris,
but yeah, also,
are you still sharing right now?
yeah,
Were you playing
it's
it
not
back there?
showing.
I don't think I'm seeing any updating going there.
Oh, I
No,
can
that's cool.
reshare.
Yeah, hold on. Let me just pull that back out for a second, and yeah, go ahead. Why don't you reshare that? You can stop sharing it for a second and then reshare. Just looks like it might have
Cool.
gotten messed up there for 1 second.
Share screen and camera, entire screen. Boom. Okay, see that?
Let me see here. Yeah, just move your play bar around, maybe.
Yeah, I'll play
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I got you. I got you for sure.
Okay,
Cool. All right,
perfect.
let me throw that back up then. There we go. Cool. Now I can see it. So this is the one with more bounce on it, basically.
Oh no, no, no. Let me do that again.
Yeah, sure, sure.
I'll like 10x it. Yeah, so here's the crazy version, right? It's
Right, right.
insane, right? Or I could use 5, or I could use like 5, but I could like limit it a lot, which I love to do. This is like set it to like have a very low limit where it will sort of like so it's back to 111. It'll sort of be like I don't know. It'll just make the animation, the jiggle, like very subtle, and it's really nice because I don't know. Back when I was doing 2D animation, I would often like kind of almost add like jiggle or like extra like this like kind of almost like fake secondary action to my animation by just like redrawing, like basically like animating like um, from like a pose like like this to a pose like this, and I wouldn't do any in betweens. I would just basically have it so that I have it posed like this, and then I draw that exact same frame again, or I even just like smooth the frame out slightly with flash I was using to do at the time, or add like a little bit of noise to it or something, and then I then immediately switch to my next frame, and then I add a frame of boil, we would call it in 2D animation. Um, and I call it kind of like a snappy tween, where it's like there's not really an in between happening, but it makes it feel much much better. Um, if I did animation with like a switcher, where it's like stepping from one frame to the next, just adding that tiny bit of extra jiggle really just makes your eye feel like it's kind of like padded and like more alive. I feel like also like I think of this as kind of like the Robot Chicken style of animation, where like Robot Chicken, they'll really snap from like crazy pose to like crazy pose or whatever, like in in that show. Um, yeah, it's a really fun, cheap way to shortcut yourself into like something that works by just focusing on the posing. And I think a lot of people actually underestimate how important posing is in animation. It's like honestly like way more important than like having like nice in betweens or something. In my opinion, most of the time.
Sure.
It depends what you're doing exactly, but
Hmm.
just having those really strong poses and like hitting them really hard is really nice. Um, but yeah, anyway, so the next thing that I'll show is that in all of my animations for a while, for at least a couple months, I've been using this rig noise HDA that I made. Um, so what I'm doing is on joint zero, or on point zero, which is the hip, I have this rig noise set up, and what it's doing is it's adding some like rotational and translation noise here, which works great with the IK chain setup, because it kind of makes it look like he's like idling, right? Without me
Yep.
having to manually keyframe anything. And what's great about this is like I can just have a little bit of noise layered on top of whatever I'm manually keyframing. So I'm almost always going to add like a little bit of rotational noise with this rig pose uh, noise now. And it's super nice. But this is just affecting that hip again.
Hmm.
So then what I do is I have another rig pose noise where this is affecting, um, I think, uh, almost all the joints. I think I can even just delete this and put a star in there and it will be the same. Um, but yeah, this will basically add random rotation, but not position change to like uh, all of the joints. And you can see now he's kind of like really like wiggling around, and this is a little bit over the top, um but it's super cool like that you can just kind of get some like free like idling animation or like extra sort of like randomness to just add in on top of your animation. um
It's
with the
really
jiggle
interesting
and
to
this.
see. It's interesting to see what the legs are doing too outside of, in this case you're not seeing, obviously you're not seeing the animation of those poses and things like that at this point, but you can see how much work that IK is doing on the legs there, right? Because you can see the legs kind of
Oh
wiggling
yeah,
around away from it or doing weird things, and then that's kind of snapping it back into using that
it
IK.
totally like most of this animation I would say is like procedural and like
Right.
not like but yeah, let me turn off all the keyframing, and you can see this is what it looks like if I just have the rig, if the rig pose or the rig noise stuff on it. It's like,
Yeah.
I could have basically shipped this if I wanted to be lazy. I wanted to add a little bit more custom poses and stuff into it, but like if you want to make a basic character and have them just sort of idling there, like this is basically that for free. Like you don't have to do any keyframing or know how to animate stuff, um, which is really sweet.
Yeah,
But
now you get like a
yeah,
drunk light bulb.
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So what's funny also is like when I was in Maya doing this stuff, like I got really into the idea of like, oh, I can animate my character and I can add secondary motion with N cloth, right? Which is like the Maya equivalent of vellum, right? And I can
Right.
add just like a little bit of extra jiggle through simulating that. And it's, this is even cheaper than that because it's not using any sims and stuff. But also being able to do that stuff in Houdini with vellum or whatever and adding extra jiggle. Also doing stuff like stuff that I'll do frequently is like add jiggle like just to like the face blend shape stuff by splitting off like the head of my character and then doing a cloth sim on them, and then having that be driven by like the blend shaped animation and then feeding that back into rig, and then having that so that, I can then like still tweak the poses and stuff even after doing that cloth sim on the face. Like there's just an infinite different way that you can like layer this stuff and play with it, and it's just so cool. And like, I don't know, I'm really excited to start seeing more people getting into this stuff and doing this stuff and figuring out like even more clever stuff than the stuff that I've been able to figure out with it.
Yeah, I think it's
um
amazing to think that this has only been out for a couple versions now too. Like this isn't
oh yeah,
this is
totally. and,
pretty
and
new.
and a lot of people haven't even touched it yet, I think. Like,
Yeah. Studios for
and
sure. Because
yeah,
they're still on
exactly
18.5, and in some studios and things
right.
like that. So they're just
Yeah,
barely dipping their toes in any of this stuff. So
exactly. Yeah, no, I remember playing with it like right when 18.5 came out and trying to figure it out immediately. And I think I have a stream on my YouTube channel still of me like kind of messing around with it, like on like a within like a month after it was released, and like showing people what I was able to figure out with it. But and back then it was really cool and interesting and new and solid, and not ideal to work with, but it's gotten much better every single release. And like, it's so much easier just on like, for example, like I was saying, like on the rig pose, just being able to um, like take a rig pose and, select a bunch of, why is that not working? Uh, yeah, just select a bunch of these guys. And like I don't think you could do this in the first version, or you could, but you'd have to like go into points mode and then press S or something. And like,
right.
just getting all the tricks back that I used to use like in Maya and stuff, and just better UI and like better performance. Also like the jiggle chop that I am using like all the time got like a massive performance boost in 19.5, I think. Like, it just like, I noticed that like all my stuff started playing back way faster. So they're like really, putting some love into this, and I really appreciate it. And I think I might be one of the only people appreciating it, but it just feels like they're making this stuff specifically for me, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that more people will start screwing around with it, because it's a ton of fun. I started to see a little bit more people posting stuff like that, which is awesome. But yeah, it's a blast. I love
Some rig
KineFX.
rolling in the chat just said I just did my first KineFX rig last week and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, it is. It's you can do a lot with it.
Nice.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, as
Glad
I'm
you're having
saying, like
fun.
people are just figuring it out now, and it's so
Yeah.
awesome. I'm like so excited about the potential with the future. And that's also why I made like that. I posted a tutorial recently that I'll just plug real quick.
Yeah.
It's a
Go
free
for
one
it.
on my YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's whoa, um, yeah, this candy rigging and animation tricks in Houdini using KineFX. Tried to make like a nice, concise tutorial talking about a lot of this stuff, but I'm hoping that like people start to steal a lot of these tricks that I have, because I think it'll be really cool to see again how people can like extend all that stuff even further and do more cool
Yeah.
stuff with it. They added this awesome secondary motion SOP for KineFX that I think you can see in this tutorial. I'm like demoing it here. And yeah, it just adds this crazy like secondary motion, like cascading down the joint chain. That is also a thing that I would like normally manually add. And like what looks amazing in KineFX is if you like here, let me do this real quick. I'm gonna add a new rig pose,
Yeah. Go for
and
it.
I'll do a bone deform, but like just in animation in general, like a really awesome way to get some follow through in a way that could totally easily be proceduralized is like I'll take like all of, or let's say I'll take this and this. Let me clear this. I'm gonna just take the shoulder, the elbow, not this one, and like the wrist over here. And I want to rotate them like this. And so I'll set a keyframe on here, and then I will rotate them down so he's waving down like that. I'll set a keyframe there, and I'll keyframe it back up here, right? And so this looks like whatever. This is like he's waving. It's kind of robotic. It's not that interesting. Um, but what looks amazing is if I then say, okay, I'm just going to take this one now, and I'm going to delay the animation on this elbow rotation by like, 2 frames or something. Like just move all the frames over just for the elbow, right? Um, and then I'll do the same with the wrist over here, except I'll delay it like 2 more frames. So I'll go like 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can kind of see it gives you that nice secondary action there.
Yeah.
But now with KineFX, with the secondary motion stop, doing that manual setup and creating all those extra keyframes is no longer something that I have to do, because I can even just delete the animation from the elbow and everything. And I can just say, okay, I'm going to use a secondary motion here. I'm going to say the driver joint is going to be this shoulder here. And I'm going to say the joint group that I want to affect is going to be like all these joints. And then it should create this really nice cascading motion like automatically. And like, again, the more of the stuff you can proceduralize, the more it kind of keeps your setup editable, versus if you are animating this by hand, you're having to bake in like all these keyframes, and then your keyframe timeline is a mess, and it like makes it so much easier to just be like, I'm going to tweak this part of the animation and not have to like delete and redo a bunch of stuff. So it's a total like game changer. And it's like totally the way that I've been wanting to work ever since I learned how to rig and animate in Maya. And now I feel like I have all the tools that I ever could have hoped for with that and more in KineFX. So it's amazing.
Yeah. Some of those tools I know have been more recent additions, and they really are amazing. That one is one that I every time I hear anybody talk about KineFX and about secondary motion and some of these things, it's just like, it's so cool to see these little things that like you said, you would normally need tons of keyframes to do, and now you're able to proceduralize that and give it parameters for that lag and that overshoot and things like that, so you don't have to go in there and keep tweaking all those keyframes when something happens, or you get a note from a client or whatever, and it's like, oh, I got to go back and change that jiggle. It's like that could take you forever if it's all keyframes. So it's
exactly
nice to go back in and
exactly.
do those things.
Yeah,
Cool.
no, totally. Yeah, it's a game changer.
Do you have anything else you'd like to plug right now? Just like while we're kind of on the topic of plugging some of your stuff, we talked about your Gumroad a little bit. Do you have anything else? I think you said you had a Patreon as well.
Yeah. I'm mainly working on the Patreon now. And if you go to my website, is just Christopher's.website. That goes to my link tree, and at the top is the Patreon.
Cool.
And everything on my Gumroad is available on my Patreon if you subscribe at like the $10 tier. And I really appreciate any support anyone is down to give me in any form, even if it's just subscribing for 1 month or just sharing my stuff or whatever. But yeah, if this seems of interest to you, check it out. I'm also trying to make more free tutorials as well, and I'm hoping the Patreon enables more of that. But yeah,
awesome.
I think my
Cool.
my plan is kind of like free tutorials on YouTube that are like beginner stuff, and then like get into the more advanced stuff with the Patreon. Yeah.
You also, I know you did one kind of bigger tutorial series for side effects. They asked you to do that thing for like the big procedural monster kind of.
That was awesome.
thing.
Yeah,
That's
the
a really cool
mega character tutorial. And I think if you go to my website, that's also linked on there directly, is the free building a mega character course. But if you go to my YouTube, I have all this stuff. I have like shorts that I've made, and then I have tutorials, and then I have like miscellaneous. This is like my talk that I did at Annecy last year for side effects.
Yep.
And then there's Bulby. the final version of Bulby.
Nice and rendered.
Oh yeah, so we can get into talking about this last part with the
Yeah,
sparks and stuff.
that's awesome. Yeah, why don't we do that? Yeah.
So yeah, let's do that. The bone deform stuff is happening here. There's a couple more little procedural animation tweaks that I
Mhm.
did. I did this sort of like uh, motion smear deform thing where you can see like the arm is kind of smearing when it's moving fast here. Or, if I, yeah, if he moves like that, it kind of smears out his arms there. And this is a very classic trick that Mark Fancher made a tutorial for um, forever ago. Shout out to Mark, which is on his Vimeo, I think. Oh, maybe it doesn't exist anymore. I'm pretty sure he has it on his YouTube, at least. But yeah, it's he's got so many tutorials on here. Here it is. Motion
Jeez,
blur
Mark.
deformation with Vex in 16.5. So this is an old one. This is the
Yeah.
first kind of like one of the first Vex things that I figured out. But yeah, Mark is awesome. And
Yeah.
I
Shout
just
out to
added
Mark.
that. Then I did a little Delta mush after just to smooth things out a little bit. If anyone isn't familiar with Delta Mush, it is the saving grace for any kind of rigger or character animator. When you're getting wonky deformations, it will sort of fix them by looking at your undeformed geometry, like the rest pose, and smoothing out parts using that like rest pose somehow to like intelligently do the smoothing without getting like volume loss. If you don't plug the rest pose into it, so you'll see over here that this is wired in to be plugged into this rest pose. But if I don't do that, then you'll see it just kind of like smooths everything out too much, not unlike a smooth SOP. But if you use that rest pose, you can smooth things out. And yeah, you'll see like over here, like you get these wonky bends. This just fixes them. And I'm surprised to continue to learn like how few people know about Delta Mush, but it's really, really handy. And yeah, so then other than that, I also, on top of that, I added this AE spring solver. One thing I'll also plug on the Patreon, you can grab the project file for this. It's just up there. So if people are curious to dig into this project, the whole thing is up on Patreon. And I've gone and unlocked this AE spring solver on there because I assumed that some people wouldn't have AElib installed, but that's an awesome free tool set to download as well. And it has stuff like the spring solver that I'm just running over all the points, and it's sort of adding this extra layer of like jiggle and stuff on top of all the jiggles and stuff that we already have. But yeah, you can see like with the spring solver, let me template before the spring solver so you can kind of see the difference there. It's just adding a little, like, especially here, this is where I really liked it, is like this extra kind of like jiggle here felt really nice to me. And you'll see though, one thing is that the spring solver kind of screws up the zap. Like if we go back up here, the zap looks cool. And then we go down here and it's like been like thinned out weirdly and stuff because it's like trying to interpolate between all the frames. So I'm just attribute copying the zap back on with this attribute copy. And then adding some normals and doing some smoothing of the normals for a collision deformer, which is then like creating this sort of kind of nice collision with the hand and the bulb. I did the same thing also up here, I believe, for the eyeballs, so that they kind of like collide into each other nicely. It's very, very subtle. I don't know if it really honestly makes that much of a difference, but it's kind of a cool thing. And I won't dive into how this works too much. It's pretty simple, but it's just using um, uh, an SDF and sampling that and um, kind of pushing in areas where along their normals where you're like inside the SDF, and it works well. And then I did one more Delta Mush after for good measure. I probably could have gotten rid of this one, but anyway, that is pretty much all of the stuff for the animation of the character itself. I think one last thing is I had to like make the bulb double-sided for it to render correctly in KineFX. I mean, not in KineFX, in Solaris. And yeah, and then over here, I think I can just change this to bulb, and it might work. V1. No, never mind. Well, that's okay. We'll turn off the cache, and I'll just show you in real time how this works. But then the last sort of bit of this is the sparks and stuff, and they added sparks into Houdini 19, I think. This like spark trail setup, if I remember it correctly. Yeah, it was like the splash icon, the loading icon or whatever. And if you basically just create a particle sim, which I did with this PopNet here, and I sourced them. Oh snap! This is being really slow. I just gotta give it a sec to cook the spring solver. But yeah, you can see basically I said on this attribute wrangle, like if the emit value is less than 0.1, then just delete it. And again, that goes back to the expression that we made earlier. But that way, like it's only going to be able to emit from this thing when it's like flickering. And then on the PopNet over here, I just run that, and it's just a really simple little pop setup, where the particles will. I just gotta give it a sec, I think, to send.
Yeah, it's no problem. There's actually a question in the chat while that's doing its thing there.
Cool.
So it said,
Hit me.
Drew is saying, could magnet SOP be used instead of a collision solve? Like instead of that collision setup you had, there, could you use a magnet
that's a really
SOP?
good question. I got to look at that more. I think that the magnet SOP is using like meta balls and stuff, which is definitely like an underexplored. Have you used the magnet SOP?
I actually haven't. That's a new one for me. I'm that's nope.
A couple Drew, nodes. You're crazy out here pulling out some deep nodes,
deep cuts.
But yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm sure you could definitely do that, but then I would have to put a meta ball onto the hand or something like that and get that all to work. I think maybe I could generate like a meta ball thing from, or maybe it doesn't need to be meta balls. But yeah, that's a good point. I should look at that again. I feel like Houdini should just have a collision deformer built into it, but yeah, I'll take a look at that. That's a good call.
Yeah, I think I always, it's always an interesting thing, you know, when people say, oh, you guys should build this into Houdini or this should get built in. It's always the thing that I always feel like I hear back from the developers and things like that are, well, we have a lot of clients and a lot of different people think that things should work a lot of different ways. So finding the right way to do it when you've got
100%.
20 people that, you know, just 20 clients period that want this same thing, like how do you make that all work? And so yeah, it's an interesting problem to solve where it's like, just do that, and it's like, well, how How do you want it to work?
Yeah.
And everybody
No,
gives you a different
totally.
answer. So it's interesting. I'm not a software
Yeah.
developer, so for me, it's very fascinating to hear that side of it. And then I'm always like, oh, I have much greater respect for you guys. Anyways,
100%. Yeah. No, everybody, regardless of who you are, always thinks that, uh, you know, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect or whatever, I think, where like, you know, a little bit about software development just from tangentially being related to it, that you feel like you really understand how it works. And like, I don't know, it's like when people who play video games like are like, oh yeah, like they should just like add like this feature to the game or whatever. And it's like,
right.
yeah, that's really easy. Like, you know, like people really like underestimate like the amount of like work because they're actually like idiots about, you know, the topic that they think that they, you know a lot about.
Bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. It's a great way of putting it. But yeah,
All right, so we
and I
got
feel the same
particles here.
way.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, yeah. Oh no, sorry. I was just gonna keep rambling about that, but like, I don't know. I feel the same way. I feel that I'm sure a lot of people feel that hardcore when they're dealing with clients who are like, "Oh, why don't you just change the smoke to bubbles?" It's like, well, that just would require me redoing everything completely from scratch, and we've already spent, 5 weeks making this smoke setup the way that you like it.
You mean there's not just a
Um,
smoke to bubbles converter? The heck?
I mean, Houdini is the closest thing to that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
just ask Chat
um,
GPT.
exactly. But yeah, anyway, so now that this is simmed,
Yeah.
basically it's just a really simple pop sim. Like it's a little bit of gravity in this pop force. I'm doing a pop kill. I did this probably in kind of a dumb way where, um, well, I'm killing any particles that end up escaping the using this pop kill with the bounding volume that's pointing to this VDB. So like any particles that are accidentally birthed outside of it or like make it through the collider for some reason, um, will oh god, I don't know why that just re-triggered the cache. Anyway, the pop kill is basically deleting stuff outside of there. The pop forces a little bit of gravity, and then there's a little bit of air resistance with the pop drag, and that's like literally the whole setup. And then over here, this time blend is like necessary for getting the spark trail to work correctly. Um, and then the spark trail, if I turn that on, is super, super nice. So if you play this, God, I might have to resim this. I hope I don't, but like this doesn't look interesting at all, really, in my opinion. But then once you add the sparks and stuff, you can like see the whole path correctly. Oh, did I just screw this up? I might have just re-triggered this whole thing. This is
That's
the
okay.
bane
When
of
it gets
any simulator's existence.
yeah,
Um, but anyway, what I mean to say is like, and it kind of goes back to all the animation principles stuff as well. And I think like, I don't know, just to ramble about like being a generalist a bit, I feel like definitely like learning character animation and all the sort of like animation principles and stuff and having experience with that goes all the way back to being like a 2D animator, like also has helped a lot with like effects and like making like my simulations look as nice as possible and like figuring out ways to like apply those things and sneak them into stuff that I'm doing. So like the cool thing about being a generalist is it kind of also makes you an extra good specialist in certain ways because like everything in every part of the pipeline ends up applying to other parts of it in some way that you don't necessarily like always think about or whatever.
yeah. No, it
But
makes total sense. Makes a ton of sense. And when you understand how the whole thing fits together, then if you do need to specialize in something, I think you can dive into that in maybe a more unique way than
exactly
somebody that doesn't have visibility on things outside. So yeah, I mean, there's always
exactly yeah, and same for the other way around too, like with effects people going into doing character animation, like they will be much better off than someone who has never done like effects animation or whatever, and there's a lot of tricks that they can kind of bring to it from that. But uh, yeah, so that's also why I'm like super excited about KineFX. I feel like it's going to get more effects people doing more animation with like bone rigs and stuff like that. And it's, I mean, like that's mostly what you're seeing, I think, with KineFX is like people doing like flowers unfurling and things like that. And that stuff is so cool. And it's like, what other program could really do this,
Yeah, you can run a
And I feel like
vellum sim on your rig,
exactly. Yeah. So it's gonna be really cool, I think, to see again KineFX getting more adopted by your traditional Houdini user, as it is gonna be, like getting like people who are character animators like coming over to Houdini and kind of seeing how things can be done there. But yeah, anyway, so going back to this real quick, now it's simmed again, and you can see like the particles, they bounce around, but like it doesn't look nice. And if you then play it back with Spark Trail, like you can really see the trajectories of like how they're bouncing around and stuff. And especially with the colored like sort of like direction paths on here, which are all like, it's all set up in the look tab of the Spark Trail, where it's like you have a color ramp, and then you can color along the length to like multiply this color by that, and then color over the normalized age and stuff as well. There's a lot of fun things to play with on there, but that's basically it. And then, the only other thing is that like there were a few instances where like the Spark Trail, like trails were extending outside of the bounds of the bulb. So I just had to do another kind of collision deformer fix thingy here to like push them inside, because there was like a few weird frames where like they might go beyond it, and I just wanted to fix that glitch. But then yeah, you end up with this really sweet little animation, and that's pretty much all that there is to Bulby. And I'll just pull up the final animation one more time.
Another thing too, just
Martini.
to I know another reason why that Spark Trail was created was because if you're doing samples in your render, you're going to get you have to do all these motion blur samples to get those nice trails, but here it's generating them without having to calculate the motion blur. So there's some nice savings there.
So and that's also a good point, is that when you're doing the motion blur, you definitely want to turn that off if you're doing a Spark Trail, because the whole idea of the Spark Trail is it's like accounting for that motion blur,
right?
Because
right.
Like you're only going to see the Spark Trail with a camera if you have like a non, infinitely small like shutter speed,
right.
But yeah, I feel like also on the same. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I was just gonna say I love this. I think he looks awesome.
Oh yeah,
I remember seeing this when you submitted it, and I was like, oh, it's really cool. Just a fun little thing, and especially to just do for a thing like Mardini. It's a fun little project.
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, and I'm really happy with how he came out. I like him a lot. Again, that mouth, zappy thing here. Like I think that's the one thing that I would have loved to like improve somehow. I'm not sure how also with Houdini I could have added like a glow onto it without like maybe making like a volume inside his head, which would have just been like an annoying amount of work. But
yeah, I don't know. Is there a post effect now in Karma? I can't remember if there is or not.
I don't think so. Yeah,
have a glow.
Although, yeah, not to my knowledge. I could have probably done it if I wanted to do it with Cops and be insane. But I mean, Cops is cool. I'm not trying to knock Cops. Obviously, it's like a bit dated, but but yeah, I did have fun playing with Cops for the one of the other entries I did. That was or the only other entry that I did, which was the Shadow, where I made this really. Oh yeah, I made this really weird like dot render effect.
Oh yeah, you showed me this. Yep.
Yeah, I've been really interested in a long time in doing kind of more retro graphics and shaders and stuff, and I feel like I in some ways kind of missed out when I talked to people who were like doing CG back in like the early 2000s and 90s on like silicon graphics machines and stuff. And, we didn't have all these fancy ray tracers now, and now everything is path traced, and, you can't even get like a Lambert shader or a blend shader or a Phong shader, even if you wanted it, in your render at least. But yeah, anyway, that stuff is super fun.
That's really cool.
Is
Yeah, I like that.
crazy.
So Drew just asked, can cops be seen in the IPR like the new compositor for Blender 3.5? No.
No,
cannot.
no.
No.
I really wish it could, and I am really hoping side effects that, when you do decide to get around to updating cops, that we have something very similar to this beautiful viewport compositor in Blender that I was actually playing with today a little bit, and it's definitely limited because it's, the first version of it, but it's
Sure.
really cool, and
Yeah.
it's just amazing that it's live and stuff. This was also, though, like pretty much all able to be done in real time, except for like tiny tweaks that I did in cops, like the glow and stuff, which is so subtle. But yeah, I mean, Sops, it can do some crazy weird rendering if you in the viewport. If you
one of the guys in our education team was putting together a little like path tracing example of how Karma works when it path traces through a scene, and where it's getting contributions from, and showing all the paths and the scattering and different it was amazing, and he did it all in Sops, and I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's like all geometry and very interesting. So
yeah, I'm a huge nerd about rendering and path tracing and all that stuff. I have never like written my own or anything, but I've definitely done a lot of research, and I watched this whole course by the 2-Minute Papers guy that was really interesting, about just, it was for, I think, like computer science students, and like some of it was a bit over my head, but it was mostly not like how to write it in C++. It was mostly like, here's the theory behind it, and stuff that was like able to be followed along by someone who knows like, at least a bit of like linear algebra and stuff. Yeah, I think that stuff is so interesting, and it's just remarkable that we can simulate light in such a convincing way with computers using this like very elegant technique. That just accounts for so many things.
I think it's also interesting too that there's so many different kind of ways that people have implemented the math that kind of talks to that process. Like there's those core ideas, right? But then each thing has their own implementation of that based on what kind of hardware you're running on it, and software, and blah blah blah, and like all that kind of thing. So I know that even like Karma CPU versus Karma XPU are different engines. Like they're different code that's in there, but it's trying to produce the same thing, but just there's just so many different ways you go about doing that in computer science. It's kind of fascinating to hear that stuff. Oh, here we go. Okay.
And yeah, here's the setup with my own character Nobby. It's basically just I did a whole breakdown of this on my YouTube, so I won't go crazy, but it's basically just these are all points that are being rendered as disks.
That's so fun.
Because you can render them as disks in the viewport. And the points are scaling up and down based on like the luminance that it's getting. I was inspired a lot by this really awesome old tutorial for Houdini by this guy who used to work at DreamWorks named Yancey Lindquist. Let me find his video. But he does this really awesome series, or this really awesome video where he basically shows how to like do all of the kind of ray traced based like shading techniques in the viewport. Right. But instead of rendering it onto a plane, he's rendering it onto the points of the actual geometry. And he shows also how to set up like, see at the end he is like this guy like totally custom like scattering light through this volume. And this is like years ago
in the viewport. That's so true.
In the viewport with just with Vex. This is just on the points. Like, and this is this is subsurface scattering being implemented. Yeah, here he's got like reflections and everything, and it's, you know, it's limited to the density of the points and stuff, as like any like point color attribute is. But yeah, people should check this video out. It's super
So
cool.
fun. Oh, that's
You know,
fun.
you could implement all the same stuff in something like this, but I just thought it was so cool that I could like play with stuff like you know, like yeah, here's it rendered with like lines and stuff, like where I'm just connecting all the nearby like points with lines using the connect adjacent pieces, and I can like tweak that so it's like connecting more pieces or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
or make,
the compression algorithm here is gonna
oh yeah, it's gonna
crap
look
its
terrible.
pants,
Yeah,
but I
that's a
if
great
you
point. Yeah,
oh yeah, that looks so cool.
that's
That's
definitely one
so
of the main
wild.
things that I suffered with posting it online, because it's like when you're doing it like this, it's like the thumbnails got really weird. Like I'm gonna show uh I think on TikTok the
I'm too old
thumbnail
to
just
use
looked
TikTok,
insane.
sorry.
Oh, TikTok's the best. I really hope it doesn't get banned. I love
Oh,
it.
yeah, maybe.
But yeah, look how weird. I don't know. Actually, maybe you can't see this, but yeah, this doesn't really. This is also, it's different on my HD monitor versus my 4K monitor.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sure.
this stuff is super weird, like for compression and all that stuff. And it's also like it's fun, and it makes you realize like how compression is specifically targeted to like work for like video, like live
Yeah.
action video, and
Yep.
like, you know, it's cool like if you're doing something like this, like for like Twitter or whatever, to export it as like a GIF instead, where like you don't have the compression artifacts and stuff, and it maybe works way better for what you're going for and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
All that stuff is weird and stuff
I
that you
yeah,
wouldn't normally think about.
I had to deal with compression stuff in other jobs that I've been in before, and it was funny. Sometimes trying to make things bigger it was weird. It was very strange file sizes and all that weirdness. Anyways,
Totally.
somebody just said in the chat, like it said Constantine Magnus did something similar with a ray tracer in Vex and Cops. So yeah, that sounds
Yes.
pretty similar.
And so did uh that dude I don't know how to pronounce his name at all, but it's like the guy who made the how to animate a cube in Houdini.
Oh gosh, that's one of my favorites. Oh
But
yeah.
he's doing it the same way that I'm kind of doing it here, where it's like being rendered on like a plane kind of, although I
Oh,
guess I'm
okay.
technically not doing that. But yeah, you can see it, like it starts off with like a grid, and then it's like shooting the rays through the grid and stuff, doing multi-sampling. But yeah, it starts off, I think, at the beginning it's literally, yeah, just on this grid, right?
This
um and
he's
at the
so
end it's like
funny too. Like
crazy.
I just
He's
love
super
his like
funny, yeah.
his timing for everything. It's just so great. Where he's like, even just in that first thing where you're like, something's weird here, but I don't know what's going on, and then he's like pulling things off, and it's just they're all good. He's got some great videos.
Yeah, there's I think it's Toronto Hug. Yeah, where he did this really insane setup with like vellum affecting where is it? It's like, I'm gonna, yeah, pull it. Yeah, here it is. It's like vellum affecting pyro affecting vellum again, and like here. It's these little guys that can like shoot each other,
Oh
and
yeah.
then
Okay.
like this one's not on his channel because it's part of this Hug Talk, but like people should be aware that this one exists. And I have no idea how to do this kind of like feedback stuff with DOPS, but it's like
Oh
insane
yeah.
that,
You have to have like galaxy sized brain to try to understand that stuff. I feel like I've tried so many times, and it's like, God, I don't even know. It's so weird.
yeah.
Like there's so many weird things in there. But yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I remember seeing that. That's a good one. Toronto Hug. That's
Um,
technically my hug, even though even though I'm far away.
straight
It's the only
across
one close to me.
the the Great Lakes
The
or whatever.
lakes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If I had a boat, I could get there quicker. Two-way coupling. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, Drew. I don't know how he did that, but if you watch the video, I'm sure he talks about it. It's probably crazy, but yeah, fun stuff.
He Yeah, he doesn't get too far into it. It wasn't enough that I think he might have posted the files.
That's cool.
But even with something that crazy, it's like, yeah, the best way to do two-way coupling is just use Vellum for everything
Right.
these
Um,
days.
so do you want to just show a little bit of what you were doing with some of the stuff in Solaris, just some of the rendering things, maybe just to kind of end off this time? I know we're getting close on a couple hours here that we've been chatting, so I don't want to like monopolize your
Yeah,
time,
I
but maybe
mean, we
if you got a
could
little.
talk about that, or we could look at the what's it called, the spot that came out. If you want to take a look at that real
Yeah.
quick,
Yeah, that's what I
I
was
think that
thinking.
might be
Yeah,
part of this thing.
that'd be
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, let's definitely talk about that for sure.
Hold on one sec. I gotta find out where my window went. There it is.
Yeah, I'll give you a second of
Okay, nice.
screen time here to be able to figure out where everything is.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So let me pull up. I don't know if I want to open up any of the HIP files for this project. I mean, I could maybe do that. But let's at least pull up the video and take a look at it together. And if people are interested in checking this out, they can see it's I reposted it yesterday, I think, on Twitter. But it's this project that we just finished at our studio, Grin Machine. That is a Nike ad that we did that had a lot of character animation, and it was all rendered with
back
Vellum.
over to you. There we go.
So we got Jason Tatum here, who's apparently a very talented basketball player for the Celtics. And it's kind of going through this sort of dream he's having of himself as a child being like a superstar basketball player. Yeah, this was like a ton of fun to play with a lot of the stuff specifically in Solaris for this. The animation was done by some Maya character animator, a team of Maya character animators that I have this really awesome friend, Miguel, who I went to school with, who's mainly a Maya character animator, and he brought on some others. They all like killed it for this, like doing all the character animation. And I just brought in all of the FBXs of the characters and ran it through a KineFX setup for each of the scenes, and then was able to do like little extra kind of tweaks and adjustments and stuff if I needed, and do all the cloth sims and all that. Yeah, this whole thing was rendered in Karma XPU, and it was like a huge relief after using Redshift for a project. And I got really burnt out on Redshift, like, and especially what I've found to be like amazing about Karma XPU is the compared to Redshift especially is like the much more interactive way I can work with it, especially because there's like CPU mode and then there's XPU, which I know are technically two different renderers and technically aren't going to necessarily always look the same, but they're close enough and they don't require like changing any settings or materials if you're using Material X at least.
Yeah, exactly.
And the thing that's nice about CPU renderers, which I think a lot of us have kind of forgotten as we've gone like heavily into the GPU zone, is how much faster they get to that first pixel. That time to first pixel is really, really quick, which is so important if you're like wanting to make a lot of tweaks and iterations. And, you know, if your scene is taking 10 minutes to, you know, like get to that, or not 10 minutes, but like if it's taking like 30 plus seconds to get to that first pixel, that is so bad for iteration, and it can make like working in like doing the look dev or the lighting feel more like a chore than like a creative task. And Solaris has like completely flipped that for me, especially with Karma, and made it so that like if I have a heavy scene that's taking a long time to load onto the GPU, I can just use CPU mode And I have like, you know, a nice Threadripper, so it's able to like do look dev pretty quickly with that. Um, Versus the XPU mode um, is perfect for like final frames because it cleans up so fast, and it you know, looks really good, and it can do almost everything that I need a renderer to do for now. You know, there's certainly a couple of things that like it is missing still, and you know, if I had needed some of those things from the get go, I might have not used it. But I think I'm pretty much sold on Karma these days, and you know, wanting to stick with that um, for like as many projects as I can, just because it's such a pleasure to work with, and it makes, you know, lighting in uh, Houdini like really fun again, as opposed to again feeling like a chore, like it did
Yeah.
when I was working with really heavy scenes on this TV pilot project that I was doing for the last year, which were taking like, you know, 45 plus seconds oftentimes to just get to the first pixel, like just to start
Yeah.
rendering. And that was just brutal.
One interesting kind
So
of technical thing to think about there too, that you're kind of getting at benefit with Solaris as well, is because it's USD. As it's going, you're already creating your kind of RS file or your ASS file in Arnold Speak, or you know, RIB for RenderMan. USD is that same kind of thing, and it does every time you hit that render button for those other renderers, they have to create that, right? And so
exactly.
in order to be able to have those things, it takes that time to bring those, you know, to bring those files, get everything loaded on your GPU, blah blah blah. If you're already writing that, you've already made a huge kind of dent in that time. So that is one benefit of working in something like Solaris anyways. And then, you know, Karma being a CPU renderer gives you that boost as well. So it's kind of a little bit of both, you know. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that I was talking to someone from Side Effects, and they were saying that if I recall correctly, they were saying that they're working on improving this like kind of oddness with XPU, where when you start rendering, it will like get you a really quick first pixel, and then it will like stop rendering until the GPUs kick in, and then it will start rendering
Yep.
again. And I was told that that is due to some kind of current NVIDIA optics limitation that like requires it to be like that.
Hmm.
But
Interesting.
ideally, in time, hopefully, this will get sorted out, and like, you know, in like hopefully within the next year, you won't need to switch between CPU and XPU at all. Like you'll just get the fast time to first pixel, and you'll get like the GPUs kicking in and cleaning stuff up really fast, you
Yeah.
know, once that happens.
Yeah, that
Um,
well, that's cool. I mean, that'd be amazing. Yeah.
but yeah, so I just opened up this scene again just to have like a thing that I
Yeah.
could actually
Something
sort
to
of
talk about.
show
Yeah, yeah.
in but the point that you're making about the USD stuff is really is really key, I think. And there's so much confusion around like what is USD, like, you know, why do I want to use Solaris? I like object level, like, you know, all this kind of um all this stuff. And you know, I definitely, when Solaris first came around, I was like, I thought it seemed interesting, but I didn't totally get it, and I tried to use it, and I was like, I don't get this at all. Like, but over time, and especially once I started diving into it over this last year, it started making more sense, and I feel like I do kind of see the vision now. And like similarly, like, you know, Katana and like Clarice are like these very odd like 3D programs that a lot of people
Yeah.
don't really understand because they're only really used in specific kinds of pipelines. Like if you're lighting at Pixar or whatever, and like you just want to have everything already pre-baked out and cached and ready to go, it'll make the lighting experience like a lot smoother. And that's kind of the whole idea, like you were saying, like you're, and like USD, I think is best to think of not as like a replacement for like a Limbic or FBX or whatever, like I think most people think of it as, and not like a replacement either for like dot hip or dot blend or whatever. Like it's
Yeah.
not that kind of scene description.
Nope.
It's like this is like a replacement for .rs or .ass if you're an Arnold, or yeah, like
100%.
the, whatever. And it's basically a non-proprietary type of scene description for the renderer to be able to read. That again, Karma ingests like natively, which makes it even quicker at doing this stuff. And hopefully all the other render engines will like have procedurals that they create for USD that will make it so that they can ingest USD more natively.
Yeah. I worked with Arnold a lot at my last job, and I think they already have all the USD
Oh
stuff
yeah,
like natively
yeah.
in there. And really that made it so much nicer to be able to work with. I mean, we had
It's
some weird procedural issues that we would run into if we were rendering between Houdini or like C4D was the other thing we were using, and like there was some weirdness there, and if we did it as a USD, it was always like, yeah, we're good. Pretty much it's pretty much all good because it
right.
can see it the same kind of on both ends. So
Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's super interesting. And yeah, something that I noticed also with Arnold, like the first time I ever really tried using Solaris, it was for this weird project that I did for like a thing that actually it wasn't technically, there's like two projects in a row that I used it for, but yeah, this animation that I made with this king character for like a kind of group project that a friend organized just for fun, called Macro Micro, where the theme is like you go from macro to micro, or vice versa. Um, but yeah, I used it for this, and I noticed that Arnold was like a million times more responsive in Solaris than it was in like object level.
yes.
And I feel like the object level version of Arnold just feels like kind of like deprecated,
Yeah, it's garbage.
like it feels like using Mantra in terms of like just like how slow it is to get to first pixel. But that's not like an Arnold thing. Like it's just a weird integration thing with Houdini object level, and I think it has maybe to do with the fact that it's using the Houdini render view
Mm-hmm.
instead of its own
Yeah.
thing. But
Yeah, that
anyway,
was always the benefit of Redshift, was that they had their own unique thing, and that worked so much better. But now that Solaris is here, if you're not using Solaris, it's kind of like, well, why? Like why like
yeah,
I don't think Redshift has a real solid integration in Solaris
yeah,
really.
and once your stuff is set up in USD, it's like lighting with it, especially if you're in Karma or something that has like a proper USD procedural, it's like butter. Like it's like so like fast to be able to like tweak stuff and move things around. I love playing with the lens shader in Karma too,
Yes.
which I used a
Yes.
lot in that Nike spot. But you can see like I'll play with it here, and like I just add a little bit of this to like everything, the curvature, just like being able to like kind of tweak my and like distort my my setup. I'm gonna turn off the depth of field just because tweaking the depth of field, or I'm gonna just make it really high. Um, but yeah, if I go back into this matte net where I have this physical lens, um, yeah, you can get like really cool, trippy effects by playing with the lens distortion. I think a lot of people know that I'm like obsessed with this to an unhealthy degree right now.
Yeah, I
But
mean
also
that's
the
something.
chromatic aberration is super cool as well.
Yeah, you use that a lot in the other one, right? Those a lot of that aberration and those lens distortions are in Karma, right? Those aren't post effects. Am I right?
Exactly. Yeah, they're all render time. Yeah, and it
That's
looks
cool.
so good. And yeah, it's really cool and really trippy and
I mean, you
really fun to
can't.
play
You.
with.
I feel like you can't beat the post effects are awesome if you're on like a crazy tight deadline and you're like, I just got to get this out the window kind of a thing. Like I got to get this out the door, got to be done. But like the quality of what you can do in here and like the interesting effect, like all the stuff you're doing right now is just so wild that you can just go, okay, yeah, let's just tweak it like this, and yeah,
Totally.
it's so cool to
Totally.
see the quality and accuracy kind of what's going on in there. So, and this is in XPU mode. Is it more
Yeah.
responsive in CPU? Like, how do you find like something like this, like the lens shader?
Um, I I think it's I think it's really good in both. I mean, it works great in both. It kind
Yeah.
of depends on how heavy your scene is, maybe. But like, I mean, like the thing that's also nice about Karma is like compared to Redshift, I find that Redshift will like re-trigger the render for like almost any change you make,
Mm-hmm.
especially when your scene gets heavy.
Sure.
And I'm making all these tweaks like without it reloading my scene. Like, and it's like
Right.
staying in the GPU and it's good. And like, that's all great. If I make a new light, it might change it.
Yeah,
And I
that
think
that would make sense. Yeah.
that, but what's nice about that also, just one more thing that I love about Solaris is I'll do a disk light here. Yeah. Um, and it's got to load. So it's taking a second
Yeah.
now. We'll see.
I think
But
this would be the stuff you would see that's a little faster in CPU because you don't have to load that into the GPU. Basically, you skip the step of having to transfer things in onto GPU to load it into memory.
exactly.
So I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. I
what
can
you'd
switch
save.
it to, I'll
Yeah.
switch it to CPU real quick and crank up the samples a bit for giggles. But yeah, what's really cool with the lights in Solaris that I love, it's not switching out of. Oh yeah, now it's reinitializing. Okay, we're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so if I move this light around, it's going to be really interactive, and you can see like how it's affecting like the reflections on
Yeah.
the bulb. But what's really nice is these buttons up here. Have you played with those a lot, Peter? Yeah,
Yeah. The
those are
the
like,
specular diffuse, all that stuff. Yeah, those are great.
yeah. I remember I was playing with Solaris, and I remembered the one of the things that got me excited about the first Solaris demo I ever saw in the Houdini 18 keynote, I think,
Yeah. Probably
um,
18 or 18.5.
was
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yeah.
was these tools. So I went back and I watched that, and I was like, oh yeah, those are in there. Let me like play with that. And so you can say, oh, I want to have this light create a specular highlight on like this part of the character, or like this part right here. It's like creating a specular highlight right there.
Yep.
And this is the other stuff that like makes it feel like you can really like paint with light. And
Yeah.
it's another one of those things that again, it makes lighting fun again, as opposed to feeling like a chore where I'm
Yep.
having like stop the render, move my camera, move the light, figure out if that's right, like start the render, stop the render, tweak it again, like, this kind of stuff. And then being able to have the controls to be like, okay, I'm going to control click to adjust the brightness.
Yeah.
Or no, that's the distance. Sorry. I can
Yep.
control click to adjust the distance. So that's nice. I can control shift click to adjust the brightness. Um, so I can do all this stuff without having to like leave the viewport, basically.
Yeah.
Um, Also, there's the shadow mode that I think is really cool, where I can say,
Yes.
I'm going to place a pivot here, and then I'm going to control click here. Oh, wait, no, sorry. I'm going to place a pivot here, and I'm going to shift click here, and I'm saying, make the shadow from this light be here. Or I'm going to shift click here, and now it's placing the light accordingly,
Yeah.
right? And I can like paint
You can
the
direct
shadow
your
instead of.
shadow. Oh,
Exactly. Yeah.
so cool.
So it's like, it's just amazing. It's like,
Like these are the things that I turn into old geezer mode where I'm like, you guys don't understand what this was like before when you had to wait for all your buckets to load and all this stuff. Like you
I
didn't have
know,
like look what's in your viewport right now. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely
I
insane that
know.
that's even possible.
And then I'm
Um
like telling all these old geezers, like, I want to use Fong shaders. How do I do that? And they're like, you fucking idiot. How dare you?
Well, that was the first F bomb on the channel, but that's just because I don't really ever
I'm
swear for
sorry.
whatever. No, it's totally fine. I'm gonna get demonetized, Chris. No,
No.
I'm not monetized anyway, so no problem. Um, there's a question in the chat about aberration color when you were messing with the stuff
Mm,
um, from the lens shader. Is it possible to change the aberration color?
I
I don't
don't
know
think
how.
it is. Um, and yeah, the you can tweak the curvature map in here.
Mhm.
That's a fun thing, but
So
I have to
there's
get back to the camera for any of this to work.
yes,
But
correct.
yeah, the thing that you can tweak with the aberration is like the ramp that I have flipped here. And I don't totally know how this works, but I think it's like basically saying like it's shifting this is like the RGB spectrum, and it's like how much each of those values is shifted maybe.
Hmm.
Um, so like if you
Interesting.
have it at all the way at 0, or if you have it all the way at 1, you're not going to get any chromatic aberration. Um,
Hmm. What if you
and
put
I
like
think
a
also,
one in the middle and bring it down? What does that do? Like make like a V shape? What
I
does
mean,
that
I
do?
suppose you could say that this kind of lets you tweak the colors, yeah, because that is
Huh.
ultimately what this is doing. Um,
Yeah.
but if I go back to 0 for the curvature, um, yeah, then it's basically like, okay, this is just zooming me in a little bit, and if I go all the way down here, then this is basically getting me back to the normal amount of zoomed
Right.
inness. And then I can say like, okay, I want the red colors to be more zoomed in, and or maybe I just want like, yeah, this weird aberration where it's, or sorry, just the blue is like getting pushed out, like, so I'm on
Yeah.
that part of the spectrum. Or I could do just that, and then, I suppose you could, in theory, like, you know, correctly, like, ramp the spectrum to like mix into the exact colors that you want, but that's obviously not a very intuitive way of doing
Yeah.
this.
No, it's definitely
Um,
not. I have a feeling there's something really physically based about something in that ramp. I want like something about the way that the lens is working. I feel like it's
yeah,
probably a more technical thing that they're doing here than like a creative artistic like you can just change this color or that color. So that would be my just knowing the base level of, of the devs at side effects. I would
yeah,
assume it's very technical whatever's happening in that ramp.
yeah.
But it's
I would
cool.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is cool.
it's super fun.
Yeah, that is neat.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's pretty much it. Do we have any other questions? I feel like we
Yeah.
we covered
Yeah,
most of
I
the
think we
good
covered
stuff. Oh,
a ton of
nice.
stuff here. Yeah, people just kind of saying, "Oh, that's pretty neat and everything like that." So, um yeah, I mean, I think it's really neat to see practical examples of something like Solaris especially in use and how people are using it, bringing a character like this in. Another thing I just like to always remind people is that when you're using Solaris with, and since its backbone is USD, the more that you can have written out to USD in your scene, the better. Like if you have animation that's getting pulled in there, if you write that out to a USD file, if you've committed to that animation at that point, write it out, because it's always going to be faster to bring that stuff in when it's written out to disk. It's not going to have to recook Solaris to make, to do one, something for you in there. You can just write out your animation in a USD file, and it has some specific ways that it wants to write animation. Actually, in one file is better than multiple files, which is very non-Houdini-ish. It's very hard for, people that are traditionally Houdini users to get in there. So lots of any time that you can right there, I can see you've got it cached out right there. Those are
Yeah,
things to do there. So
and they
just
just
to
added this file cache to make stuff easier, and they're making it easier every release too.
yep,
But yeah, it's weird, and like it doesn't make sense why things are the way that they are at first. But
yep,
then as you use it more, like it begins to make a lot more sense. And you also think about how it's like SideFX's goal is to make everything as procedural as possible, and like object level is just inherently not a procedural way of doing things, really, compared to something like this where you're editing your scene procedurally from the top down or whatever.
yeah,
And I think like the old school way of like importing an FBX or whatever, where it would like set like an object level rig up for you and stuff with the bones that are all objects and stuff. I did a bit of that. Michael Goldfarb did some awesome tutorials.
yeah. He was on the dev team. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He was like, like I think he's like a character TD for Side Effects was like his title. Maybe I'm not
yeah.
sure.
Now he works on our team, on the education team. Once all the bone stuff kind of got deprecated, he came over to our team to help with education and things like that. Since he's been a Houdini user for like 20 some years now, so
Right.
um, So but he
The-
was on the TD team for building all those tools and things like that. And that stuff was crazy. There were so many
yeah,
bones that would just get thrown everywhere in your network. It was
I
nuts.
learned it just for. I actually made a tutorial on it. I think that is linked on. Oh, the other thing we should plug is uh, HoudiniNerd.com,
Oh, what is
which is
this?
my. Oh, you don't know this? Yeah, this is
Oh
my
my
learning
gosh.
resource that I made for people for learning Houdini. And if you
Amazing.
go to the rigging section, there is a legacy rigging section, and I made
Nice.
a rigging tips little thing on Vimeo. It's like a hidden video that I made that shows how to use the auto rigger and stuff. It's still
Yeah.
there. I mean, you can use it if you want. I wouldn't
Oh my gosh, look
super
at that.
recommend it, but I figured out all this stuff for Hulai 2020 because I wanted to do character stuff back then, and it was right before KineFX stuff came
Yep.
out.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, like it did work really well. It
Yeah.
just was not as procedural as KineFX, and
No.
um, you know, so I think that's something kind of worth considering with Solaris. It's like this really is a level up from object level in terms of like how procedural it's making editing the scene. Um, and USD is also like inherently procedural as well, which is I think why side effects decided to kind of like latch onto it for Solaris.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's hopefully going to be a really worthwhile investment by them, and I'm really liking it, and I think a lot of people are coming around to it now,
Yeah.
especially now that Karma is so good. And yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think
No,
it's
I
got a
think
lot of
that's
promise.
I think that's exactly right. And a lot of studios worldwide are starting to really look at using Solaris and use even Karma in their workflows and things like that. So
Yeah,
we've heard that more and more. So I mean, it's exciting for us as a company, but also just like I think it's a good sign for USD to really take hold industry wide and be able to be
totally.
there for a lot of stuff. I mean, games are even starting to
Yeah,
talk about it now too, which is crazy. So
I
it's
feel
all
like if
really
it wasn't for side effects in a way, like Houdini or USD would kind of still be like in the Stone Age, like
well. There's a
like
lot of things that we learned that the industry learned. I mean, I've been trying to kind of follow along with the USD working groups that are out there and stuff like that from the Academy Foundation, and apparently through using USD in Solaris, Pixar realized that there was problems with Hydra, which is the viewport, and they never
right.
had used Hydra apparently before that. So there was some really fascinating things like that where it's like there's just things that had to kind of come out in the wash kind of a thing while you were using it and while we were learning. So the fact that we've now gone through what 3 versions of Solaris, in Houdini is a big, and I think it's going to keep going from there. So well,
Totally.
Chris, seriously, man, thank you so much for coming on the stream. I really appreciate it. It
Of
was,
course. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of
yeah,
fun.
of course. Oh my gosh, super fun. This was kind of um, kind of always has been my desire for this stream to be able to have people come on and chat and have a place for people to hang out and talk about Houdini and learn new things and stuff. So these are kind of exactly that. And hopefully we'll have more of this over time. Obviously we just had kind of a random connection and we were able to do this. So, yeah. So thank you so much for coming on. And, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more from me as far as stuff coming out soon. I've got a few more series that I'm thinking about. Yeah, but for now, I'll let you go, Chris, but, thank you so much for being on here. I'll kind of cut you free visually, and
Nice.
we'll get you out of here. Thanks so much, man. But anyways, for me, that is pretty much it for my stream tonight. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you for for commenting in the chat and just being around and stuff like that. Obviously, lots of really interesting stuff that Chris was able to share with us. And I always am learning things through these streams, and it's super great to be able to share that with everybody else. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll catch you next time. Keep an eye out on social media and stuff like that for updates about what future topics and things like that we'll be doing. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye.